Norbert Erlandsson had a name. He had carried it for 11 years like a blade he intended to use. A name given to him in the hours after his daughter Marlies vanished, spoken by the only person he trusted absolutely, in the terrible quiet that followed the discovery that her room was empty and her window was open and the estate's most secure wing had been breached without a single alarm. A name he had built an 11-year obsession around. A name that had cost him 2 wars, 4 alliances, and every version of himself that existed before the night she disappeared. He had hunted that name across 3 cities and 11 years, and a body count he had stopped numbering somewhere around year 4. Norbert Erlandsson is one of the most feared men in the country. He has spent 11 years being absolutely certain about one thing. That certainty just collapsed in a single page. And the question sitting in that study with him right now, the one he cannot answer yet, the one that changes everything depending on what the answer is not where Marlies went. It is who built the lie that sent him in the wrong direction for 11 years. Subscribe and hit the notification bell immediately. Because the person who invented that name knew Norbert well enough to know exactly what he would do with it. And that kind of knowledge only lives in one place. Stay right here. This story is about to go somewhere nobody is prepared for. Last Tuesday, his investigator placed a file on his desk. Norbert sat with it for a long time before he opened it. Inside was a single page. A forensic report. A financial trail. The kind of documentation that did not leave room for argument or alternative interpretation. The man who took Marlies had never existed. The name had been invented. The witnesses had been paid. The evidence had been constructed, carefully, professionally, by someone who knew exactly how Norbert Erlandsson's grief worked and had used it with surgical precision to point him in a direction that had absolutely nothing at the end of it. 11 years. 3 cities. A body count he had stopped numbering. Hunting a ghost. Which meant only one thing. Marlies was not taken. And the person who made him believe she was, had been inside his house the entire time. Tove Rasmussen had worked for Norbert Erlandsson for 9 years, and in that time she had delivered him information that had ended careers, terminated alliances, and on 3 separate occasions redirected the balance of power in organizations considerably larger than his own. She was methodical, private, and constitutionally incapable of drama. When she had something to say, she said it with documentation. When she had nothing yet, she said nothing at all. She had placed the file on his desk at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning without preamble. "Take your time with it," she said. Which was the closest she had ever come, in 9 years, to acknowledging that something she was delivering might require more than professional processing. Then she left and closed the door. The study was a room Norbert had not changed in 11 years. Not the desk, not the arrangement of the shelves, not the single photograph on the corner of the bookcase. That had been deliberate. When Marlies was taken, he had made himself a promise: nothing in this room moves until she comes back. It was the kind of promise a man makes when he needs something to hold onto that is entirely within his own control. The photograph was of a girl at 8 years old, standing in the estate's east garden in her school uniform, squinting at the camera with the expression of someone who had been told to smile and had decided to negotiate the terms. She had her mother's eyes. She had his jaw. She had a small crescent birthmark on the inside of her left wrist that she had been embarrassed by at 8 and that he had told her, on more than one occasion, was the mark of someone who knew her own mind. He had not looked at that photograph in 6 months. Looking at it had become something he rationed. He opened the file. He read it once. Read it again. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of his study for a very long time. The name he had been given, the name spoken in those first terrible hours by the one person in his inner circle he had trusted without reservation, was a construction. The man it belonged to did not exist in any verifiable record before the night Marlis disappeared and ceased to exist in any verifiable record approximately 72 hours after. The witnesses who had confirmed the name in the days following had each been paid, 3 of them from the same account, routed through a shell company registered in a city Norbert had never operated in. The shell company had been opened 14 months before Marlis vanished. The account had been funded in 3 installments. The first installment had been made on the same date as a document Norbert had signed in a private meeting in this very study, 11 years and 4 months ago, when his organization was at its most precarious and he had made a decision he had told himself was temporary. He knew what that document was. He had not thought about it in years. He had not allowed himself to. He looked at the photograph on the bookcase. At the 8-year-old who had negotiated the terms of her own smile. At the crescent birthmark on the inside of her wrist. He was still looking at it when Dale Vorscht knocked on the study door 40 minutes later. "Not now," Norbert said. The knock did not come again. He picked up the file and read it a 3rd time, because the 3rd time was when he stopped looking for the error he wanted to find and started understanding the architecture of what had been built around him. The man never existed. Which meant the person who gave him the name had built the ghost on purpose. Had funded it, staffed it with paid witnesses, and handed it to a grieving father with the knowledge of exactly what he would do with it. Norbert Erlandson looked at his study, the desk he had not changed, the photograph he had not moved, the room he had held still for 11 years in honor of a promise, and understood, with the slow, devastating certainty of a man receiving information he has no framework for, that he had been managed. The question was not who had taken Marlis. The question was who had loved her enough to build an 11-year lie to keep her away from him. And the answer to that question was one he was not ready for. Not yet. But it was coming. The file sat on the desk for 40 minutes before Norbert opened it. In his professional life, he did not hesitate over files. He had read reports on deaths, betrayals, financial catastrophes, and territorial collapses with the level of attention of a man who understood that information was only useful if you received it without the distortion of what you wanted it to say. He had built his entire career on the discipline of reading things as they were rather than as he needed them to be. This one he sat with. Because Tove's parting instruction, "Take your time with it," was not the instruction of a woman delivering good news or neutral news or even the kind of bad news that had a solution attached to it. It was the instruction of a woman who had understood, before he opened the file, that what was inside it would require a different kind of processing than anything she had previously brought him. He read it. He read it again. He read it a 3rd time looking for the error. There was no error. The name he had been given 11 years ago, the name of the man who had taken his daughter, spoken to him in those first unbearable hours by Dale Vorscht, his second, the man who had run his inner operations for 14 years and whom Norbert had trusted with a completeness he had trusted no one else, did not exist. No records before the night of Marlis's disappearance. No records in the 72 hours after. The supporting witnesses, 4 of them, each contacted separately, each providing consistent corroboration of the name, had been paid from the same account. The account had been opened 14 months before Marlis vanished. The funding had arrived in 3 installments, the first of which was dated to a Tuesday in spring, 11 years and 4 months ago. Norbert knew what had happened on that Tuesday. He had been in this study. Across this desk. Signing a document in a meeting that lasted 22 minutes because his organization was being squeezed from 2 directions simultaneously and the only viable path through had required him to offer something he had told himself was a temporary concession. A piece of paper. A name on a list. His daughter's name, listed under the phrase secured asset, to be transferred at the age of 18 to the Breslau organization as part of a peace arrangement. He had told himself he would find a way around it. He had 2 years before the agreement required any action. 2 years was enough time to rebuild, to reposition, to make the agreement unnecessary by making himself strong enough that no one would dare enforce it. He had told himself that. He looked at the corner of the bookcase. At the photograph. At the 8-year-old squinting at the camera with her crescent birthmark on the inside of her left wrist. Someone had known about the document. Someone had known what it meant and had not believed he would find a way around it in time. And that someone had removed Marlis from the equation entirely, 6 months before her 9th birthday, and handed Norbert a ghost to chase. Not to hurt him. To stop him from finding her. The document had been the motive. The ghost had been the mechanism. And the 11 years of war and bodies and burning cities had been the result of a misdirection so precise it had required intimate knowledge of how Norbert Erlandsson processed grief. He called Tove. She picked up on the first ring. She had been waiting. The account, he said. Who opened it? A pause. The kind that meant she had known he would ask this and had been deciding since Tuesday morning how to deliver the answer. That's what I need you to come and see, she said. There's a second file. He looked at the study. In the room he had not changed. At the 11 years of deliberate stillness he had maintained in honor of a promise he had made to a daughter who, the file was now suggesting, had never been taken at all. Bring it, he said. The second file was thinner than the first. Which, in Tove's methodology, meant it was more significant. She operated on the principle that the most important information took the least space to state. Lengthy files meant complexity. Thin files meant clarity. Clarity, in Norbert's experience, was the more dangerous of the two. She sat across from him in the study for the first time in 9 years. She had delivered everything else in the corridor or through an intermediary or in the brief, efficient exchanges they conducted at the edge of meetings. The study was a room she had understood, without being told, was not for professional use. That she had agreed to come into it now told him something about what the file contained before he opened it. The shell company, she began, without preamble. The one the witness payments were routed through. I traced the registration to an attorney in a city called Verith. The attorney's records are sealed, but the funding source for the company's initial capitalization is not. It came from a personal account. She paused. An account in the name of Ingrid Erlandsson. The study held the silence. Ingrid, Norbert said. The account was opened 6 months before the company. The company was opened 14 months before Marlis disappeared. The timing is deliberate and the trail, once I knew where to look, is not especially concealed. It is not concealed at all, actually. I think it was always intended to be found. Eventually. Norbert looked at Tove. You think she wanted us to find this? I think someone did, Tove said carefully. The document that directed me to the shell company arrived in my office 3 weeks ago as an anonymous submission. The routing was professional. I cannot trace the sender. But the document itself is 17 years old and comes from a filing system that only 3 people in this organization have ever had access to. She let that land. You are one of them. Dale is another, Norbert said. Yes. And Ingrid was the third. When she was alive, yes. Tove's voice was entirely level. She was not suggesting anything. She was simply noting the geometry of what existed. Norbert looked at the thin file. At the account name printed in clean documentary type. At the date the account was opened, which was 2 months before the document he had signed in this study, which meant that the account that funded the ghost had been established before the document existed. Which meant Ingrid had not reacted to the document. She had anticipated it. She had known him well enough to know what he would do before he did it. Is she alive? Norbert asked. Tove was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know yet. The death records are certified. The burial was attended by 200 people. But the certification was processed through a physician who retired to a city outside our reach 6 months after the funeral and has not been professionally traceable since. She paused. I am still working on it. Norbert said nothing. He looked at the study. At the room he had kept still. At the room Ingrid had known he would keep still. Because she had known him. There is one more thing, Tove said. She reached into the folder she had carried in and set a single sheet on the desk. It was a placement confirmation from a domestic staffing agency. A new member of household staff, scheduled to begin work at the estate in 3 days. I did not arrange this, Tove said. Mrs. Solvig requested a placement for months ago and the agency confirmed yesterday. I reviewed the candidate's file this morning. A pause. Her name is Marlis. The room went completely still. She's 22, Tove continued. Listed address is a city 3 hours from here. No prior estate experience. The agency placed her through a referral. The referral source, she stopped. What? The referral source is anonymous. But it was submitted from the same document routing system as the file that started this investigation. Norbert sat with that. Someone is sending her here, he said. Someone sent you the file and then sent her, Tove said. In that order. 3 days apart. He looked at the placement sheet. At the name printed in ordinary agency type. At the age, 22, which was exactly the age Marlis would be if she had been 9 when she disappeared. Don't tell Dale, Norbert said. Tove nodded once. She gathered the files and left the study. She closed the door with the careful quietness of someone who understood that the man on the other side of it needed the room to himself for a while. Norbert looked at the photograph on the bookcase for a very long time. Someone sent Norbert a file exposing the lie his entire life has been built around and then, 3 days later, sent a woman named Marlis to clean his house. These two things are not coincidences. Norbert knows they are not coincidences. Tove knows they are not coincidences. The only person in this estate who does not know anything is about to walk through the front gate with a suitcase and absolutely no idea whose floors she is about to scrub. Subscribe right now, because in 3 days, a 22-year-old woman is going to step into a house that has been held still for 11 years in her honor. And she does not know that yet. Marlis arrived on a Thursday morning with one suitcase, a canvas bag of books she had not had room to leave behind, and the particular composure of someone who had moved enough times to know that new places revealed themselves in the first 48 hours if you paid attention and asked the right questions in the right order. The estate was not what she had expected from the agency's description. Comfortable household, the listing had said. Private employer, discretion required. The reality was a property that communicated something considerably more substantial than comfortable through its very architecture, the scale of the gates, the discipline of the grounds, the quality of the silence that lay over everything like something that had been carefully maintained. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Solvig Ark, was waiting at the staff entrance with the expression of a woman who had been managing large households for 30 years and had developed a framework for assessing new staff in under 2 minutes that she trusted more than any application form. She looked at Marlis for those 2 minutes and apparently found whatever she was looking for, because she said good. You're not late, and turned and walked inside. Marlis followed. The first thing she noticed, in the way she noticed things, quietly, without making it visible, was that the house felt held. That was the only word she could find for it. The rooms were furnished and staffed and entirely functional, but there was a quality to the air in the corridors, particularly in the wing that contained the study, that felt like something had been paused mid-breath and was waiting for permission to exhale. She did not mention this to Mrs. Solvig, who struck her as a woman with limited patience for observations that were not directly operational. She was assigned the east wing, the library, the morning room, and the corridor outside the study. Mrs. Solvig explained the study with a precision that told Marlis the explanation had been given many times. The study was never entered unless the occupant requested assistance. The study was never cleaned in the occupant's absence without written instruction from the occupant. The study, in short, was a room that had its own rules, and those rules were the rules. Understood, Marla said. She did not see the employer on the first day. She did not see him on the second. She was aware of him in the way she was aware of the study, as a presence that structured the energy of the house without being directly visible in it. Staff moved with a particular awareness in certain corridors. Conversations that had been easy became slightly more careful in the East Wing. She catalogued all of this without drawing conclusions, because she had learned over a lifetime of moving through other people's spaces that conclusions drawn too early were the most expensive kind. On the second afternoon, she was working in the East Library when she found the book. It was not the book itself. It was the bookmark inside it, a strip of paper with a child's handwriting on it, the letters large and deliberate in the way of someone who has only recently learned to make them. It said, in that careful hand, "The East Garden has the best light in the morning." M. Marlis looked at the M for a moment. Then she set it carefully back between the same pages where she had found it and continued with her work. She did not examine why the M had landed somewhere near her sternum in a way she could not immediately categorize. On the third morning, she was in the East Corridor retrieving a volume from the upper shelf when she heard footsteps behind her. She reached up, her sleeve falling back, her attention on the book's spine. Then she heard it. Not a word. A sound. A single involuntary sound, barely audible, from somewhere behind her. The kind of sound that comes from a person who has seen something they were not prepared to see. She turned. A man was standing in the corridor. Tall, grey at the temples, with the composed bearing of someone who had spent decades deciding not to show what was happening internally and was, for the first time in what appeared to be a very long time, failing at it. He was looking at her left wrist. At the crescent birthmark on the inside of it, visible from 3 meters away in the morning light of the East Corridor. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her face. "Marlis," he said. It was not a question. It was not an introduction. It was the voice of a man saying a word he had been carrying for 11 years and had just found a new use for. She looked at him. "I'm sorry." He did not answer immediately. He looked at her wrist again, at her face again, and something was happening in his expression that she did not have a framework for yet. Something vast and terrible and very quiet all at once. "What is your full name?" he asked. "Marlis Veen," she said. The name her mother had given her when they moved. The name on her identification. The name she had carried for 11 years without being entirely sure why her mother had chosen it with such specific care. He nodded once. A slow nod. The nod of a man confirming something he had already known. "I'm Norbert," he said. "I own this house." "I know," she said. "Mrs. Solvig mentioned you." "She tends to," he said. And he looked at her wrist one more time, briefly, with an expression she could not read, and walked past her down the corridor toward the study. Marlis looked at the birthmark on the inside of her wrist. The crescent. Small, slightly irregular on the right side. She had had it her entire life. Her mother had flinched every time she saw it for as long as Marlis could remember, and had never told her why. She put the book back on the shelf and stood in the East Corridor for a moment, holding the feeling of a door she had not known existed opening by 1 degree. Dale Vorscht had been Norbert's second for 17 years and in that time had told him one lie. He had told it 11 years ago, in the hours after Marlis disappeared, when Norbert had come to him with the specific look of a man whose grief was in the process of becoming something more dangerous than grief and who needed a direction to point it before it consumed everything. Dale had given him a name. A name he had been given that morning by a woman who had arrived at his apartment at 4 o'clock and sat across from him in his kitchen and explained, very carefully and very completely, what she had done and why and what she needed from him. Ingrid had been precise. She always had been. She had laid out the document, Norbert's document, the one he had signed in the study 4 months earlier, on Dale's kitchen table, and she had said, "You know what this means as well as I do." She had been right. He did know. He had been present at the meeting where Norbert signed it and had said nothing because Norbert in that particular moment had been unreachable in the way desperate men are unreachable, and saying something would have cost Dale more than he was prepared to pay. He had lived with that silence for 4 months before Ingrid arrived at his door. She had asked him for one thing. A name. Something credible, something that would hold under moderate investigation, something that would give Norbert 11 years of purposeful direction before it fell apart. She had been specific about the timeline. It needs to hold for at least 10 years, she had said. By then Marlis will be of age and the threat will have resolved itself one way or another. Dale had asked her what she was going to do. She had told him she was going to disappear. He had asked her if Norbert would survive 11 years of this. She had looked at him across the kitchen table with Ingrid's specific directness and said, "He will survive it better than he would survive knowing the truth." And Dale, who had known Norbert for 17 years and had been present at the document signing, had not been able to argue with her. He had given her the name. He had attended her funeral 2 months later with the rest of the organization and had watched Norbert stand at the graveside with the particular stillness of a man who had run out of the architecture required to process one more loss. He had said nothing. He had continued saying nothing for 11 years, through every war and every body count and every city Norbert had burned looking for a man who did not exist. Now he stood outside the study door at 9 in the morning on a Thursday and understood from the quality of the silence on the other side of it that the file had arrived. That Tove had found what Ingrid had always intended to be found, eventually, when the timing was right. He knocked. "It's Dale." A long pause. Then, "Come in." Norbert was standing at the window. He did not turn when Dale entered. Outside, the East Garden was doing what the East Garden always did in the morning, the light moving through it in the particular way the estate had been built to catch. "You gave me the name," Norbert said. "Yes." "She gave it to you." "Not a question." Dale said nothing, which was confirmation of a kind that required no words. "How long have you known she was alive?" "I've suspected for 3 years," Dale said. "I haven't known. I've chosen not to look directly at it." Norbert turned from the window. He looked at Dale with the expression he kept for information that was too large and too close to be processed at professional distance. It was not anger. It was something older than anger and considerably harder to resolve. "She told you why," Norbert said. "She showed me the document." The study held the silence for a long time. Outside, someone was moving through the east corridor. Dale heard the quiet, particular footstep of the new staff member, the one named Marlis, whose presence he had noted yesterday with the attention he gave to everything that arrived at the estate and whose face he had not yet allowed himself to look at directly, for reasons he was not ready to examine. "The organization I signed her to," Norbert said. "The Breslau Network." "When did they fall?" 18 months after Marlis disappeared, Dale said quietly. The room absorbed that. The full weight of the arithmetic. The document had lost its teeth before Marlis turned 11. The threat Ingrid had sacrificed 11 years to protect her daughter from had dissolved while they were both still in hiding. Did Ingrid know? "I don't know," Dale said. "If she found out in year 2 or 3, she may have had reasons to stay away regardless. She didn't know you the way you know yourself. She knew the version of you that signed that document." Norbert looked at the window. "At the garden." At the light. I would have found a way around it, he said. Dale said nothing. Because that was the sentence that had no answer. That was the sentence that Ingrid had heard, in her imagination, 11 years ago in a kitchen at 4 in the morning, and had decided she could not afford to trust. There is a woman in the East Corridor, Norbert said. New staff. I know. She has a crescent birthmark on her left wrist. Dale closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them. Then said, in the voice of a man who has been carrying a weight for 11 years and can feel, finally, that someone else's hands are on it, I know. Dale gave Norbert the name. He has known the lie for 11 years and said nothing because Ingrid showed him a document and he could not argue with it. Norbert stood in that corridor this morning and said a name to a woman who has been living under a different one for 11 years. And neither of them has said the one thing that would make this real yet. Subscribe right now and stay close, because a letter is coming. It was written a long time ago by a woman who is running out of time. And it will arrive tomorrow morning. And after Norbert reads it, nothing in that study will be the same. Marlies had grown up understanding that there were things her mother did not tell her. This was not a wound, exactly. It was more of a texture to their life together, the particular quality of a silence that her mother maintained around certain subjects with the practiced ease of someone who had been maintaining it for so long that the maintenance had become invisible. There were no dramatic refusals, no conversations that ended in walls, no emotional weather that announced itself before arriving. There was simply some things Ingrid did not speak about. And Marlies, who had inherited her mother's instinct for knowing which questions would cost more than their answers, had learned to work around those silences rather than into them. She had learned, for instance, not to ask about her father. The subject was not forbidden. It was simply surrounded by a quality of careful sadness in her mother's face that told Marlies the answer lived somewhere painful and that going there served neither of them. He died when you were very young, her mother had said, the one time Marlies had asked directly, at age 7. He was a complicated man who loved you very much. She had accepted that. She had grown up with it. She had built a complete interior life that did not require a father's presence because the alternative was a grief about someone she did not remember, and Marlies was not constitutionally inclined toward grief about things she could not change. But the corridor had happened this morning. The man saying her name. Not Marlies Veen. Just Marlies. In the voice of someone who had been using that name internally for a long time and was now saying it out loud for the first time. She sat on her staff bed that evening with a canvas bag of books she had brought from her last apartment, and she took out the one at the bottom. Not because she intended to read it. Because her mother had given it to her 3 months ago with a specific instruction, don't open this until you are settled somewhere new. You will know when. She had not opened it because she had not been settled. She had been in transit, between placements, between cities, doing the thing she and her mother had been doing her entire life without ever naming it, moving, carefully, in a direction that kept a sufficient distance between them and something Marlies had never been allowed to fully see. She had the placement. She had the room. She had a man in a corridor who had looked at her wrist and said her name with 11 years in his voice. She opened the book. Her mother had hollowed out the center pages. It was the kind of thing that, in any other family, might have seemed dramatic. In theirs, it felt like precisely the kind of methodical, careful solution that Ingrid brought to every problem. Inside the hollowed pages was a small sealed envelope and 3 photographs. The first photograph was of a woman Marlies recognized as her mother, younger, standing in what appeared to be the east garden of this estate. Not a garden like this one. This garden. The same bench, the same tree line, the same morning light quality she had noticed through the east library window that morning. The second photograph was of a man she did not recognize at first. And then she looked at it longer and understood, with the specific disorientation of seeing something you have only ever seen from one angle suddenly visible from another, that she did recognize him. She had spoken to him in a corridor this morning. He was younger in the photograph. Unguarded in a way he was not currently unguarded. Standing beside her mother, one hand at the small of her mother's back, in the east garden with the morning light behind them. The third photograph was of a child. 8 years old at most. Squinting at the camera with her mother's eyes and a crescent birthmark on the inside of her left wrist. Marlis looked at the third photograph for a very long time. Then she opened the small sealed envelope. Inside was a single card in her mother's handwriting. It said, "I need you to trust that what I did for you. The letter will explain everything. It is coming to him. Read it after he does. Then decide. That is the only thing I have ever asked of you that was truly for me. Let him read it first." Marlis sat on her staff bed in the east wing of her father's house and held the 3 photographs and her mother's card and the hollow book, and she breathed, carefully and slowly, through the arrival of a truth she had been circling her entire life without being allowed to look directly at it. The man in the corridor this morning had said her name in a voice that contained 11 years. She understood now what those years had cost him. And she understood, in the same moment, what they had cost her mother. And she understood that she was sitting in the middle of something she had not consented to and could not undo and would have to decide, in her own time, on her own terms, what to do with. She put the photographs back in the hollow book. She put the book back in the canvas bag. She did not sleep. It arrived the next morning. Handwritten, 12 pages, in an envelope addressed to Norbert Erlandsen in Ingrid's handwriting, postmarked from a city 800 kilometers away. Mrs. Solvig brought it to the study door with the expression of a woman who did not know what she was carrying but had understood from the quality of the handwriting on the front of it that she was carrying something significant. Norbert thanked her. Closed the door. He sat with this envelope the way he had sat with the file, for a long time before opening it. But the quality of the sitting was different. The file had required preparation. This required something else. The specific gathering of a man who understood that what was inside an envelope in his dead wife's living handwriting was going to reorganize 11 years of his interior life and that he needed to be ready to receive it as it was rather than as he needed it to be. He read it. 12 pages. He read them slowly. He read them the way Ingrid had always deserved to be read, with the full attention she had always brought to everything she did and that he had not always given her in return. She began with the document. She had found it for months after he signed it. Not by accident. She had been looking. She had known, from the quality of his distraction in the weeks following the meeting, that something had been decided that he was not telling her, and Ingrid, who loved him with a completeness that did not require ignorance to sustain itself, had looked until she found it. She had read it twice. She had sat with it for 3 days. She wrote, "I did not doubt that you loved her. I never doubted that. What I doubted was whether love, in the context of what you were navigating in those months, was sufficient protection. You were managing 2 simultaneous crises and you had signed a document that solved one of them by using our daughter as a bridge. I believe you told yourself it was temporary. I believe you intended to find a way around it. I also know, because I know you, that the version of you who signs a document like that in a moment of extremity is capable of finding reasons, in the months and years that follow, why the bridge needs to stand a little longer. And I could not build Marlis's safety on my ability to predict which version of you would be standing at the due date." He read that paragraph twice. She explained the ghost. The name, constructed through an attorney in Verith with no connections to anyone either of them knew. The witnesses, sourced and funded carefully. The timeline, she had planned for 10 years and billed for 12. She had asked Dale for the one thing she needed from the inside and had not asked him for anything else because she understood what it would cost him and had not wanted to pay for more of his integrity than was strictly necessary. She explained the funeral. Practical, she wrote. Forgive the drama of it. But a disappeared woman is searched for. A buried one is mourned. And you needed a grief you could see the edges of. I know that sounds cold. I was not cold. I was precise. There is a difference, and you know that better than anyone. Then she wrote about the Breslau organization. She had found out in year 3 that they had fallen. She had sat with that information in a small apartment in a city he had never visited, and she had wept, she wrote, not from relief but from the specific grief of a woman who understood that she had made a decision based on a threat that had resolved itself 18 months after the decision was made. She wrote, I stayed away anyway. By year 3 you had been hunting the ghost for 2 years and it had changed you in ways I could see from a distance but could not assess from it. The hunt had become the point. The point had become you. And I did not know what bringing Marlis back into proximity with that version of you would mean for her. I chose wrong in year 3 and I have lived with that ever since. I am sorry for it. I am not sorry for the original decision. I need you to understand the difference between those two things. She wrote about Marlis. About who she had become. About the moving, and the schools, and the canvas bag of books she carried between apartments. About the composure that was hers alone and the stubbornness that was his. About the crescent birthmark she had been embarrassed by at 8 and proud of by 15 and entirely neutral about by 22, in the specific way you become neutral about something that has always simply been part of you. The last paragraph was brief. She wrote, I am dying. The physician expects 3 months, possibly 4. I have spent 11 years keeping her safe from you, and the last 3 months have been spent sending her back. The file went to Tove because Tove would find the truth in it and bring it to you without emotion, and you needed to receive it that way first. Marlis went to the estate because she needed to arrive before you knew she was coming, because if you had known you would have controlled the meeting, and the meeting needed to happen without your control. I gave her a hollow book and 3 photographs and a card that told her to let you read this first. Whether she listened is a question I have decided to trust her with. She has always had better judgment than either of us. Take care of her, Norbert. She is not who you have been building her into in your memory. She is considerably more than that. She always was. That part she gets from me. The jaw she gets from you. It will cause you problems. I recommend patience. I know that has never been your strength. It was not mine either. Perhaps that is why we needed 11 years to get here. He sat with the letter for a long time after he finished it. Then he went to find Marlis. Ingrid just sent her husband a 12-page letter from 800 kilometers away explaining that she faked her death, built a ghost, sent their daughter to clean his house, and then told the daughter to let him read the letter first. The daughter has a hollow book with 3 photographs and is currently deciding what she thinks about all of this in a staff room in the East Wing. Norbert has just finished reading. And Ingrid, who has been 3 steps ahead of everyone in this story for 11 years, ended the letter with a note about the jaw. Subscribe right now, because Norbert is about to walk into the East Wing. And Marlis is going to see him coming. She was not in her room. He stood in the doorway of the staff quarters for a moment, looking at the neatly made bed and the canvas bag of books on the chair beside it and the hollow book he could see from the doorway, sitting on the small table with its cover closed and its pages no longer hollowed because their contents were in the pocket of whatever she was wearing today. Then he looked at the window. At the direction the morning light was coming from. He went to the east garden. She was sitting on the bench. The same bench that was in the photograph on the corner of his bookcase. She was sitting with her knees together and her hands in her lap, and the particular composure of someone who has arrived somewhere they did not know they were heading and is in the process of deciding what they think about it. She heard him coming and did not turn immediately. She waited until he was close enough that turning was a decision rather than a reflex. Then she turned. They looked at each other in the east garden with the morning light behind him the way it had been behind both of them in the photograph he had been given and that she now carried in a hollow book. "You read the letter," she said. Not a question. "Yes. My mother told me to wait until you did." A pause. "I nearly didn't." "You have her instincts." "I have her stubbornness," Marlis said. "She told me the jaw was yours." He looked at her jaw. It was his. She had her mother's eyes and his jaw and the crescent birthmark on her left wrist, and she was sitting in the east garden with the morning light behind her, and she was 22 years old, and 22 years was all of her and not enough of it simultaneously. He sat on the bench beside her. Not close. The appropriate distance of two people who are beginning something that does not yet have a name. "Did you know?" he asked. "Before the book. The photographs. Did any part of you know what this house was?" Marlis was quiet for a moment. "I knew the east garden," she said. "When I came through on the first day, I had a feeling I couldn't locate. Like recognizing something before I did." She looked at the garden. "I found a bookmark in the library. A child's handwriting. It said the east garden has the best light in the morning." "You wrote that," he said. "You were 7. You put it in every book in that library." Marlis looked at him. "Every book?" "Every one. I found 43 of them in the first year. I stopped looking after that because," he stopped. "Started again. It was easier to find them by accident than to go looking." She nodded. She understood the distinction. She had been making a version of that same distinction her entire life, managing what she approached and what she let come to her, because some things were too large to go toward and could only be received. "The document," she said. Because it needed to be said. Because the letter had explained it, and she had read the letter a second time through the hollow book pages, and she needed to know what he was going to do with it now that she was here. Norbert looked at the garden. At the light. "I signed it," he said. "I told myself it was temporary." "I know. My mother wrote that too. She was right not to trust it." He said it without looking at her. The admission of a man who had had the letter for 4 hours and had used those hours to do what he should have done 11 years ago, which was to sit with the full truth of what he had been in that season and not find a way to make it more comfortable than it was. She was right. I would have found reasons to let the bridge stand longer. I would have told myself I had more time. I have spent 11 years telling myself I would have found a way around it. But I was in a particular moment and I signed a particular document, and the version of me that did that," he stopped. "I cannot promise you who I would have been at the due date. I can tell you who I am now. And I can tell you that those are different people with the same name." Marlis looked at him. At the man who was her father, which was still a sentence she was assembling one word at a time inside her chest. "Would you have found a way around it?" she asked. The question landed in the east garden and sat there. Norbert said nothing for a long moment. He looked at the morning light. He looked at the bench. He looked at the 22-year-old woman sitting beside him who had his jaw and her mother's eyes and a hollow book in her room and the composure of someone who had moved enough times to know that new places only revealed themselves if you asked the right questions. She was asking the right question. He said, "I want to tell you yes." "That's not an answer," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I didn't say it." The east garden held the silence. Above them, the light was doing what the east garden light always did in the morning, moving through the tree line in the particular way that a 7-year-old had once written down in 43 bookmarks because she had wanted someone to know about it. Marlis looked at her hands in her lap. at the crescent birthmark on the inside of her left wrist. "She's dying," she said. Not a question. She had known since her mother gave her the hollow book. The timing of it, the precision of it, the 3 photographs arranged in the order that would allow Marlis to arrive at the truth at exactly the pace she needed, that was not the methodology of a woman with time. "Tove is locating her," Norbert said. "We will find her." "Before," Amala stopped. "Before," he confirmed. "Yes." She nodded. She looked at the garden. She said nothing else for a while, and he said nothing else for a while, and they sat on the bench in the east garden where the morning light was exactly as a child's handwriting had promised it would be, and that was, for now, enough of a beginning. Tove found Ingrid in 4 days. She was in a city called Merso, 814 kilometers from the estate, in a small house at the end of a street lined with birch trees, being cared for by a woman named Brecht who had been her neighbor for 6 years and who opened the door to Tove's knock with the expression of someone who had been expecting this visit for some time and had mixed feelings about its arrival. "She's awake," Brecht said. "She's been awake since the letter arrived." Tove drove back and reported to Norbert, who drove to Mercer the following morning with Marlis in the passenger seat and Dale in the back and nobody saying very much for the first 2 hours, which was the right amount of saying very much for that particular journey. Marlis looked out the window for most of it. She had been at the estate for 7 days now and in that time had had 2 more conversations with Norbert in the East Garden, both of which had been shorter than the first and more direct, which she had understood as his particular way of progressing through difficult territory, not in long sustained movements but in precise, frequent ones. She had her mother's instinct for reading people and she had been reading him since the corridor and the birthmark, and what she had found was a man who had spent 11 years becoming something in the service of a grief that had been built for him by someone who loved him, and who was now, with the particular disorientation of someone emerging from a very long tunnel, trying to locate who he was in the light. She thought it would take him a long time. She thought it would take her a long time too. She thought they had the same amount of time available, which was an uncomplicated thing to think and a complicated thing to feel. She thought about the hollow book and the 3 photographs and the card that had said let him read it first. She thought about a woman who had spent 11 years running a misdirection operation with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the people she was protecting were worth the cost. She thought about year 3, when Ingrid had found out the threat was gone and had stayed away anyway, and about what that decision had cost her, and about whether she had been right. She had not decided yet. That was honest. She allowed herself to be honestly undecided about it, because it was large enough to deserve that. They arrived in Merso at noon. Brecht showed them in. The house was small and clean and full of the specific quiet of a space that had been lived in carefully by someone who understood that the spaces you inhabited were a reflection of what you were still trying to be. Ingrid was in the sitting room. She was smaller than Marlis had assembled from the photographs. Not frail exactly, but reduced in the way that certain illnesses reduced people, not by taking things from them but by making visible how much of what had been large in them was a quality of presence rather than of body. Her eyes were the same. Marlis recognized them because she had been looking at them in a mirror her entire life. Norbert stopped in the doorway. Ingrid looked at him. 11 years. 2 cities. A funeral. A ghost. A letter that had arrived at the correct time by design, in the way everything Ingrid did arrived at the correct time by design. "You look terrible," she said. "You're dead," he said. "Administratively," she said. "Not actually." He looked at her for a moment. At the woman he had buried and grieved and been unable to stop grieving in the way you are unable to stop grieving people who understood you so completely that their absence leaves a specific shape. Then he walked across the room and sat beside her and did not say anything else for a while, and she did not say anything else for a while, and Dale, in the doorway, had the expression of a man who had been carrying a weight for 11 years and had just, finally, been able to put it down. Marla stood in the sitting room of her mother's house in a city she had never been to and looked at the two people who had built an 11-year architecture of misdirection and grief and stubborn, misdirected love around her, and she felt the specific complexity of someone who has been protected by a decision they had no say in and has to decide, in their own time, whether protection and consent are the same thing or adjacent to it. They were not the same thing. They were adjacent to it. And that adjacency was where the work would be. But first, the room. The birch trees outside the window. Her mother's eyes in her own face. Her father's jaw set in a particular way that she now understood was what he looked like when he was trying not to show something too large to contain. She sat on the other side of her mother. Ingrid reached over and looked at Marlis's left wrist. At the crescent. She pressed her thumb to it briefly, the way she had done, Marlis now understood, every time she had seen it. Not flinching. Confirming. The way you confirm something you have been afraid to lose. She has your jaw, Ingrid said to Norbert. I know, he said. She told me it would cause problems. It will, Ingrid said. It caused me problems for 20 years. Mother, Marla said. He knows what I mean, Ingrid said. Norbert looked at Marlis. There was something in his expression that was working its way toward something. Not quite ready yet. Still assembling. But moving. He would not get to ask her the question today. Not the real one. They would need more time before the real one could be asked properly and answered honestly and received as it deserved to be received. That was going to take the kind of patience that had never been his strength and was not going to become his strength quickly. But he looked at his daughter in a sitting room in Merceau and he understood, with the quiet certainty that arrived after very long journeys, that the question would wait for him. That she would wait for him. Not because she owed him waiting. Because she had her mother's judgment and her mother's judgment had sent her here. Ingrid had been right once and wrong for 9 years. She had written that herself. Norbert had signed a document and spent 11 years hunting a ghost build to protect his daughter from it. Marlis had spent 22 years moving between apartments with a canvas bag of books and a hollow book she had been told to save and a crescent birthmark on her wrist she had never been given the context for. None of them had been entirely right. None of them had been entirely wrong. The work of figuring out the distance between those two things was going to require more time than an afternoon in Merceau and more honesty than 11 years of careful misdirection and more patience than Norbert Erlandsen had ever in his life managed to sustain. He intended to try. Outside the window, the birch trees did what birch trees do in the afternoon light of a city 800 kilometers from a study that had been held still for 11 years in honor of a promise. Marlis looked at her mother's hand on her wrist. Norbert looked at the East Garden photograph he carried in his jacket pocket, because he had taken it from the bookcase the morning after the letter and had not yet found a reason to put it back. The room was quiet. The right kind of quiet. The kind that comes not from pausing but from arriving. It was, in the end, the beginning. The end. Real talk, Norbert spent 11 years hunting a man who never existed, built by the woman who loved him enough to become his enemy. Ingrid spent 11 years in hiding, protecting their daughter from a threat that dissolved 18 months after she ran. And Marlis spent 22 years moving between apartments with a canvas bag of books and a hollow book she was told to save, carrying a birthmark she was never given the full context for. None of them were entirely right. None of them were entirely wrong. And the question Norbert was not ready to ask yet, the real one, the one the East Garden has been waiting for, is coming. Subscribe right now and tell us in the comments, was Ingrid right to build the ghost? Was she right to stay away in year 3 when she found out the threat was already gone? And the one that will split this comment section completely, if Norbert had known Ingrid was watching, would he have burned the bridge? Drop your answers. We read every single one. Part TWO is coming. Stay close.